The NHS Counter-Fraud and Security Management Service, as its name suggests, has two component parts. The counter-fraud aspect is there essentially to protect valuable NHS resources, and that means the resources that are required to deliver the best possible patient care. And what we have to do is to make sure that nobody steals or cheats that money from the NHS. And whether that's patients, contractors, professionals or suppliers of goods and services to the NHS, it can be anyone. We have to make sure that we put measures in place to stop fraud from happening and making sure that if those who are guilty of committing fraud are punished for it. So that's the work that we try and do within the NHS on the counter-fraud aspect. The security management, as the name suggests, is there to manage security in the NHS. And what that means essentially is protecting the people and of course the property that the NHS owns. And what this means is people who visit the NHS, who use the NHS, who work at the NHS, feel that they're in a safe and secure environment. They're not there to be abused, to be assaulted, to be attacked. And what we make sure we try and do is issue guidance, help those in the NHS and help make sure that they know to report any security incidents to us that allows us to take action right the way across the NHS. So in very simple terms, they're the sort of two areas that we're responsible for that go to make up the name of the Counter-Fraud and Security Management Service.
The NHS Counter-Fraud Service is here to deal with all reports of fraud and corruption within the NHS, to deal with these appropriately, apply sanctions where they're appropriate, and wherever possible to recover monies lost to the NHS. The types of fraud that we find in the NHS affect a number of different areas. It can be patient fraud, it can be professionals, staff and managers. An example of fraud committed by patients may be where they are not entitled to free dental care, but they may claim exemption by either providing false documentation to support that claim. Some unscrupulous professionals will make claims for the services they haven't provided, or they will alter forms to imply that the payment hasn't been received. People within the NHS can report fraud firstly directly to their local counter-fraud specialist, and all members of every trust and PCT should try to get to know who their counter-fraud specialist is. The second line is through the fraud and corruption reporting line, which is 0800 028 4060. This is a free phone line and is available during working hours during the week time. We're quite happy for a counter-fraud specialist to see that person and deal with them. Everything that is passed to us is done so in confidence, and in actual fact if they want to remain anonymous they're quite at liberty to do so, and we will respect that.
Fraud proofing in the NHS tries to reduce the possibilities of fraud happening. Of course, prevention is better than allowing a fraud to happen and then have to detect it and investigate it. There are four areas that we would look at, four measures that we would look to implement in any policy or any system. The first measure is to have clear rules and evidence-based procedures. Having clear rules will make the system as simple as possible, but make fraud that much more difficult. Evidence to support any claim or any exemption will help prove that that exemption is valid and also enable monitoring to take place afterwards. So this all makes it clear what the person should or shouldn't be doing. The second measure is accountability. Having a declaration that somebody signs when they're making a claim or an exemption will hold them to account for the details that they've provided, to make sure the details are correct, that they understand that if the details that they've provided are incorrect then sanctions could be taken against them, and also it enables that data to be shared with others for monitoring to take place. The third measure is monitoring. Monitoring in any system is necessary where money changes hands or exemptions are granted. Unfortunately, fraud will get through systems regardless of what measures we put in place, so we need to be able to monitor it to identify these particular cases to take further action. Now we could look at samples, small samples or larger samples depending on the risk, and we could also target those samples or have them randomly selected, again depending on the risks of individual systems. The fourth measure is sanctions. Unfortunately, fraud will get through the system. Once the monitoring is undertaken, an identified case, it will need to be investigated. Sanctions then can be considered. This could include civil proceedings to recover the losses, criminal proceedings through the courts, or disciplinary proceedings with the employing organisation. Over and above that, in any system, we might look at additional sanctions. This could include fixed penalties, financial penalties, or removal from the scheme, which will stop them defrauding that scheme again.
The NHS Security Management Service is part of the NHS Counter Fraud and Security Management Service, which in itself is part of the NHS Business Services Authority. We were created in 2003 and tasked with providing trusts with the tools, policies and guidance so that they can better protect their staff and their property, which ultimately will allow them to provide better patient care. One of the roles of the Security Management Service is to make it as easy as possible for NHS staff to report incidents of either physical or verbal abuse. To that end, we've introduced the Security Incident Reporting System, better known as SIRS. Now, this system not only makes it easier for staff to report instances of physical or verbal abuse, but it also makes it easier for the local security management specialist to offer that member of staff support and guidance, possibly even through to prosecution of offenders. Fundamental to the existence of the NHS is the ability to provide patients with care. Now, sometimes it's the case that those who don't require treatment in hospitals create a nuisance or a disturbance, which diverts staff from actually providing that care. To that end, we've introduced the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act powers to allow hospital trusts to remove those individuals who are creating a nuisance or disturbance, whether that be shouting off or blocking passageways or what have you, but giving the power to hospitals to remove those people so that they can do the work that they're there to do, provide patient care.
The Legal Protection Unit is part of the Security Management Service structure, and they provide as a unit free legal advice to NHS trusts, local security management specialists, security management directors on anything in relation to violence and abuse and security matters in the NHS. They are a supportive unit for all our development of policy and guidance in relation to violence and aggression, and they basically provide a support for people who might not be able to get advice in legal terms on the types of things that they have to deal with locally in relation to violence and aggression. The Legal Protection Unit also leads on private criminal prosecutions, so in situations where for whatever reason the police or the CPS or both feel that an incident of violence that's occurred against an NHS member of staff is not suitable to go through to court, then the LPU will look at that case, and if it's at all possible legally, they will take that case to court and we will support the member of staff through that process. The NHS Security Management Service provides support, training and guidance to local security management specialists through the group of area security management specialists that we have working for us. Those people provide any support for trusts locally in relation to security. They provide almost a consultancy to people locally at trust level on anything that relates to security, violence and aggression, protection of property and assets, all the areas that our strategy covers. A lone worker, under our definition, is anybody who works alone, away from earshot and sight of their colleagues. So it's not just people who work in the community, it could be somebody working in a building late at night, closing a laboratory or a pharmacy, anybody who doesn't have the support of their colleagues. We have guidance on provided for lone workers generally. Our not alone guidance has been very well received across the NHS, provides some real practical tools for managers and staff. But in addition to that, we've recently been in the process of procuring and delivering an NHS lone worker service, which is a technical solution to lone working issues. We feel that lone workers should be well protected because they're a very vulnerable group, and this service provides the opportunity for NHS trusts to provide a real practical technical solution to any staff that need that in their work.
Every NHS trust has a local counter-fraud specialist that covers their trust, and indeed there are also local security management specialists who are responsible for the incidents locally and making sure that all the measures are in place that protects their trusts. So they can be contacted at a local level. Indeed, we, the Counter Fraud and Security Management Service, can also be contacted, and I think our free phone number will be made available if there's anyone who wishes to report an incident of fraud. And on top of that, of course, there is our website as well, where there's far more information about the whole range of things we do, and more importantly, as to how you can contact us.